the institutions and policies, values come together and we take stock, and it's possible then to improve and chart a new course for democracy.
It's the people's right to self-determination, and if they want to be independent, they should be independent. We will not start a war against Greenland.
Hello and welcome. I'm Kriti Mehta and you're watching the China Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at the top headlines this hour. French President Emmanuel Macron gears up to visit Beijing today. He is expected to put pressure on his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping to help secure a ceasefire in Ukraine and discuss trade relations. South Korean President Lee Jae-myung urges Seoul to remain neutral in this spat between Japan and China over Taiwan, urges neutrality in escalating tension between the two countries. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer warns that China poses national security threats to Britain, defends government's decision to step up engagement with the country for business, however. US President Donald Trump signs into law a measure forcing the US State Department to review guidelines for the country's engagement with Taiwan amid escalating concerns that China could move against the self-governing island. China moves to impose a value-added tax on contraceptive drugs and devices, including condoms, in its latest attempt to reverse plunging birth rates that threaten to further slow its economy. South Korean President Lee Jae-myung calls for neutrality in Japan-China-Taiwan tension, also discusses challenges of building nuclear submarines with the US. US-Russia find no compromise on key territory issue after Ukraine talks. Kremlin says Ukraine talks with US useful but a lot of work ahead. South Korean president makes a special address on one-year anniversary of Yoon's failed martial law bid. Lee says future generations must not go through crises like the martial law. And big news coming on Russia-Ukraine talks for peace. Russian presidential envoy Kirill Dmitriev has called Ukraine peace talks between Russian President Vladimir Putin and US President Donald Trump's special envoy Steve Witkoff productive. Meanwhile, Kremlin aide Yuri Ushakov has said that the 5-hour-long talks were constructive but made no breakthrough on the Ukraine peace deal. Ushakov has added that no compromise was reached on territorial concessions by Ukraine. He described the talks as useful but stated that there is a lot of work to be done and that contacts between the US and Russia will continue. Let's in fact listen into Ushakov's remarks.
Мы, естественно, с американскими коллегами обсудили содержание тех проектов, тех документов, которые американцы какое-то время назад передали в Москву, прошлись по этим документам. Мы не обсуждали конкретные формулировки, конкретные американские предложения, а обсуждали суть того, что заложено в эти американские документы. С чем-то мы могли согласиться, и президент это подтвердил своим собеседникам. Что-то у нас вызвало критику, и президент тоже не скрывал наше критическое и даже отрицательное отношение к ряду предложений.
Как вы считаете, по итогам переговоров ближе стали к миру или дальше?
Не дальше, это точно. Не дальше, это точно. Но предстоит еще большая работа, как в Вашингтоне, так и в Москве. Условлено об этом, и контакты будут продолжены, как я сказал.
вариант?
Пока еще компромиссного варианта найдено не было, но некоторые американские наработки, они выглядят более-менее приемлемо, но их нужно обсуждать.
Meanwhile, US President Donald Trump has called the war in Ukraine a mess and not an easy situation to resolve at his final cabinet meeting of 2025. Let's listen in.
As you know, we have a problem with a war that our people are trying to settle now with Russia and Ukraine. We are not involved in the war monetarily anymore. Biden gave away $350 billion like it was candy. That's a massive amount of money. And much of it in cash, a lot of it in equipment. I don't give away anything. We sell the equipment to NATO. The European nations pay us for the equipment, 100% price. And then they bring it to Ukraine or whatever they do with it. But we're trying to get that settled. I've settled 8 wars. This would be the 9th. And our people are over in Russia right now to see if we can get it settled. Not an easy situation. Let me tell you what a mess. It's a war that never would have happened if I were president. Not even a chance. And it didn't happen.
Let's now welcome Satoru Nagao, who's fellow at the Hudson Institute, joining us live from Tokyo. Thank you, Satoru, for joining us this morning at News XO World. Now, talks are held, but if Russia says there's going to be no compromise on the territorial issue, how is Ukraine to react and how are peace talks expected to proceed from here?
Of course, it is not easy to proceed. In this ceasefire agreement can made if both sides can declare the victory. So that's why this is a win-win. That's why it has happened. And in this case, the 2 issues are very important. First issue is, of course, a territorial issue. And the reason Russia invaded Ukraine related with the 2 states in the eastern side of the Ukraine. So that's why Russia tried to get 2. But this means that Ukraine will lose these 2 states. So that's why this is one kind of the zero sum. So that's why if Russia will not concede, of course, the Ukraine side do not have the will to abandon the territories they lost. So that's why it is not easy. And in this case, we should remember what happened in the Korean Peninsula after the Korean War. Because the Korean War is still legally, it is continuing. So that's why the combat is ceased, but at the same time, legally, this is under war. But the line between South Korea and North Korea is fixed under the agreement. So same things could happen if Russia and Ukraine agree in this place. So that's why the concession of the territory is very serious and critical. But and another one in the topic is, of course, securing Ukraine after the war. In this case, Russia also opposed this because if the NATO country deploys the forces in the ceasefire line between Russia and Ukraine, Russia cannot expand territory in the future, not easy at least, so that's why they oppose it. So Russia opposed both case, the territorial case and securing Ukraine case. In both cases, Russia opposed because Russia want to expand the territory in Ukraine, and if the war has ceased temporarily, but in the future they want to expand too. So that's why it is not easy to agree in a ceasefire, which could be fixed like the Korean War. This means that Russia cannot expand anymore in the future. So it is a very difficult negotiation now.
And Mr. Nagao, how do you weigh Trump's statement also now coming in his final cabinet meet of this year? He says the war situation between Ukraine and Russia is a mess, one that even he has not been able to resolve so far, having claimed that he's mediated in 8 other wars and been able to resolve those, but not this one.
President Trump's image is unpredictability. So that's why the unpredictable president means that there is no victory scenario for invaders. So that's why it is not easy. That is true, I think. But at the same time, Russia's invasion to Ukraine has already started and continue the war, and the Russian side do not have the will to cease. In this case, it is very difficult for the Trump administration to stop Russia, the war in Ukraine. So that is the current situation. So if the Russia will not stop the aggression in Ukraine, of course the United States need to strengthen the sanction against Russia. That will happen, I think. But view from the United States to deal with China, they want to divide Russia and China. And in this case, Russia's aggression to Ukraine and related with this, they need to impose sanctions. This is not a good situation for the United States, they think. So that's why the view from the world, the U.S. do not want to do that. At least the Trump administration do not want to do that. But the view from the reality, they need to do that. They need to impose strong sanction to Russia. So that is the current situation I analysis. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Nagao, for joining us and speaking to us this morning, but I request you to stay on. We now move on, viewers. French President Emmanuel Macron has arrived in Beijing for a high-stakes visit focused squarely on the war in Ukraine. Macron will be meeting China's President Xi Jinping and Premier Li Qiang, urging Beijing to use its influence over Moscow to help secure a long-awaited Russia-Ukraine ceasefire. France says China, as a permanent member of the UN Security Council, has a responsibility to push Russia toward ending the conflict. But previous appeals from Macron have brought little movement, and China still refuses to condemn Russia's 2022 invasion, even as Western governments accuse Beijing of supplying key components to Russia's defense industry. Macron's three-day visit to China comes just after Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky visited Paris, warning Europe to stay united. Macron is also due to discuss trade with his Chinese hosts. And we now move on to news from South Korea, where President Lee Jae-myung says the country still has unfinished work in dealing with the fallout from last year's failed martial law attempt. In a special address marking the first-year anniversary of the botched coup, Lee said the nation's constitutional order was protected because ordinary citizens stepped forward to defend democracy. He announced plans to propose December 3 as the People's Sovereignty Day, saying citizens deserve recognition and should even be considered for the Nobel Peace Prize. The failed martial law bid was launched by former President Yoon Suk-yeol on December 3, 2024, plunging South Korea into months of political turmoil. Yoon was eventually removed from office, and Lee, who had lost to Yoon in 2022 election, returned to win with a snap vote in June this year, with a mandate to stabilize the country and restore public trust. Listen in.
이체혁명으로 탄생한 국민주권정부는 우리 국민의 위대한 용기와 행동을 기리기 위해 12월 3일을 국민주권의 날로 지정할 것입니다. 대한민국이 존재하는 한 헌정 질서와 민주주의를 지켜낸 것을 함께 기념하고 더 굳건한 민주주의를 다짐하는 계기로 삼겠습니다. 친위 쿠데타 가담자들에 대한 엄정한 처벌은 그 시작입니다. 사적 야욕을 위해 헌정 질서를 파괴하고 심지어 전쟁까지 획책한 그 무도함은 반드시 심판받아야 합니다.
And I'd now request Mr. Nagao to join us back in this discussion. Mr. Nagao, crucial statement now coming in from South Korea that says that the cleanup of the martial law mess is not yet complete. What more should we expect? Am I audible, Mr. Nagao?
Okay. 1 year ago, the martial law imposed by the former President Yoon was failed. So that is a good thing for the democracy because the democratic country should not be changed their regime by force, by call. But that is true. But at the same time, in case of South Korea's politics, there is another traditional fact which is not good for the South Korea is all presidents need to go jail after their tenure. So that's why this is the situation. So view from the democracy, they are improving the situation. That is true. That is a good thing. But at the same time, why in the South Korea's politics, everyone need to go jail after tenure? But that is a little bit unfortunate fact, I believe. But that is a little bit sad situation.
All right. I thank you, Mr. Nagao, for joining us and giving your comment on this. And with that, viewers, we now shift our focus and move on to some other pressing developments coming from Seoul. South Korea's President Lee Jae-myung has also said that Seoul should not take sides as Japan and China intensify their dispute over Taiwan. Speaking at a news conference, he used a Korean saying to stress that stopping a fight is better than choosing a winner. He warned that taking sides would deepen tension in a region he described as highly dangerous for military security. The dispute escalated after Japan's Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi suggested Tokyo could act militarily if China invades Taiwan. Beijing responded with diplomatic criticism and advised its citizens to avoid traveling to Japan. Cultural events have also been affected, including the cancellation of a Japanese singer's show in Shanghai. China continues to view Taiwan as its territory and has not ruled out using force to bring the island under its control. Let's listen in.
일본과 중국이 갈등을 겪고 있는데 우리가 한쪽 편을 들거나 그렇게 하는 것은 갈등을 격화시키는 요인입니다. 개인 간의 관계도 마찬가지고 국가 간 관계도 마찬가지지만 최대한 공존하고 존중하고 협력하는 것이 바람직합니다.
All right, and joining us in this discussion is Andrew K.P. Leong, China strategist, joins us live from Hong Kong. Thank you, Mr. Leong, for joining us this morning in India from NewsX World. How do you view the statement that's coming in from South Korea? What does it really talk about the nation's foreign policy?
It's not surprising. If you look at the Southeast Asian countries, very few of them want to take sides in the rivalry between the two great superpowers, the United States and China, particularly for South Korea, because South Korea is also an ally with the United States. Don't forget that there are American forces stationed in South Korea, mainly against the North Korean aggression. But nevertheless, American troops are deployed in South Korea. And South Korea also recently has formed an alliance, closer military alliance with Japan. Again, it's part of this United States anti-China policy, a China containment policy. Because if you look at how the United States is dealing with expanded China's influence in the Asia Pacific, you have the first island chain centering in Okinawa, second island chain centering in Guam with lots of American assets. And the United States is now putting South Korea and Japan closer together militarily to contain China in the north of the South China Sea. And then south, you have the AUKUS with Australia, United Kingdom, and the United States submarine power deal. And of course, you have the Quad with Australia and India, Japan, to contain China. So if we look at the Asia-Pacific China containment policy, South Korea is a very important part of it. But on the other hand, South Korea doesn't want to make an enemy of China. Economically, a lot of South Korean businesses are in China, producing a lot of stuff for shipment worldwide. And South Korea, of course, relies on China as a counterweight against North Korea because the stability of the Korean Peninsula is also very important to South Korea. So that's why South Korea doesn't want to be forced to choose. And this kind of attitude of not being forced to choose is very common among ASEAN member states.
All right, thanks for your comment there, Mr. Leong. Viewers, crucial here how South Korea is choosing to maintain neutrality between the China-Japan spat over Taiwan. And with that, viewers, we move on to another development in this regard coming from the United States, where President Donald Trump has signed into law a measure of forcing U.S. State Department to review guidelines for the country's engagement with Taiwan. Amid the escalating concerns that China could move against the self-governing island. The measure requires periodic State Department reviews to explain how the guidelines deepen the relation between U.S. and Taiwan. The reviews, conducted at least every 5 years, must also outline ways to remove self-imposed restrictions on U.S.-Taiwan engagement. However, Trump's signature comes after a call in which Chinese President Xi Jinping stressed that unification remains vital for Beijing, which views the self-ruled democracy of Taiwan as part of territory. Meanwhile, U.S. Representative Ann Wagner, the Missouri Republican, has said that U.S. stands strong against the Chinese Communist Party's dangerous efforts to dominate Taiwan. And I'd now request Mr. Leong to join us back into this discussion here. Mr. Leong, now U.S. leaders have traditionally maintained an approach of strategic ambiguity when it comes to Taiwan. But now with Trump signing this bill to deepen ties with Taiwan, how is China expected to react?
Well, this increased military ties with Taiwan also is part and parcel of the United States' consistent policy towards Taiwan, because that's defined by the Taiwan Relations Act, which was enacted decades ago at the time when the United States chose to recognize the People's Republic of China as representing the whole of China, and hence the One China policy, and de-recognizing Taiwan. But on the other hand, there was the China-Taiwan Relations Act, empowering the United States government to continue to supply arms for Taiwan to defend itself. Now, this latest deal only doubles down on this policy. The latest policy, of course, is try to turn Taiwan into a military porcupine. You know, the animal with a lot of spikes, a military porcupine, so that Taiwan can defend itself. Now, the American Taiwan policy is defined consistently by three documents or enactments. The first one, of course, the Taiwan Relations Act, which I have explained. The second one is the so-called three communiques, defining Taiwan, the United States' continued support for Taiwan, and opposes unilateral use of force to change the status quo, and the so-called six assurances. The assurances were given by the previous President Reagan. The assurances amount to several key tenets. The first one, the United States takes no position on the future of Taiwan. Secondly, continue to oppose unilateral solution of the Taiwan question, which is to be left to the Taiwan people. Thirdly, the United States takes no role in mediating between Taiwan and Beijing on the future of Taiwan. But of course, the preference is for the Taiwan question to be resolved peacefully through negotiations. So this kind of strategy squares with a much misunderstood Beijing strategy on Taiwan. Now, Beijing, of course, wants Taiwan to be reunited. President Xi already said a number of times that the latest time for unification is 2049, which is still some years back. But it's also defined by the three white papers on Taiwan, the last coinciding with the Nancy Pelosi's previous provocative visit to Taiwan. All the three papers stressed preference for peaceful unification. Now, the peaceful unification is defined by three strategic strategies. The first one is, of course, military deterrence against any unilateral attempt to declare independence or other forces intervening to push Taiwan towards independence. Secondly, also a kind of economic and diplomatic isolation of Taiwan, where very few countries around the world recognize Taiwan now. The latest is St. Tom, one of the Pacific Islands, with the change of government to a pro-Beijing government, and that would reduce the number of countries recognizing Taiwan. The third and last, but not least, is the people-to-people exchanges. The two countries, the people are visiting one another. Lots of Taiwanese businesses are already operating on the mainland. As many as 300,000 Taiwanese, together with families, already living on the mainland. So with more people-to-people exchanges, with military deterrence, and also economic and diplomatic isolation, the momentum is set for Taiwan to be pushed towards the negotiating table for peaceful unification, and that squares with the United States policy of Taiwan.
All right. Well, thank you for that perspective, Mr. Liang. But I request you to stay on, as we have another crucial development coming in from China that I'd like your comment on. Now, viewers, China will impose a value-added tax on contraceptive drugs and devices for the first time in more than 30 years, as it seeks to reverse plunging birth rates. A newly revised VAT law adds a 13% tax on items such as condoms, which have been exempt since 1993 during the one-child policy era. At the same time, Beijing is offering incentives for families by exempting childcare services, elder care, disability services and marriage-related services starting January. Now, the shift reflects China's growing concern over a shrinking population, with just 9.54 million births recorded last year. But rising childbearing costs and an uncertain economy continue to deter young people from having children. The new tax has also sparked debate online, with some warning it could discourage safe sex at a time when HIV cases in China are on the rise. Others dismiss the measure as symbolic, questioning how higher condom prices would encourage childbirth when many already feel they cannot afford to raise a child. And I'd request Mr. Liang to join us back once again into the discussion here. Mr. Liang, this is a crucial development that's coming in. How do you view it, given that the cost of raising a child up to the age of 18 for young adults is not easy at a time when the economy is rather slow and the job market is unstable in China?
Well, the unwillingness for childbirth and for to get married, actually, it's not only because China, but also Japan and some other countries in Asia, because the cost of childbearing are very high, together with, especially in China, and together with the cost of education, the cost of raising the children, so that they have a brighter future, to get to the best universities. All these costs are very, very prohibitive at a time when the economy is not doing very well. And so this translates, and also there are relative less generous social provision, medical facilities or medical care, and so people are sitting up for the rainy day. So all these translates to unwillingness to get married, unwillingness to have children, and that's why increasing a tax on condoms or whatever is not going to change the picture. But on the other hand, in the coming 5-year plan for the year 2026 to 2030, China is going to put a lot of effort in doing something about the worsening demographics, including maybe better social provision, better child care facilities, and also increasing salaries for the young people, and also clamping down on the property market. And making it easier for people to own homes. So hopefully this would arrest the further decline of the Chinese demographics. But Chinese demographics is a given now because of the huge momentum created, left over by the One China policy. And to address that, China is increasing its productivity by pivoting towards high technology, to AI and other technologies that define 21st century. Because that would increase productivity without a lot of human labor. So declining demographics is not the be-all and end-all of China's economic dynamics.
All right. Thank you for now joining us here at NewsX World. Mr. Liang, we appreciate you giving us your time. And viewers, that's a wrap on the China Report. But do keep watching NewsX World for more international news updates from around the world.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen.
Hello and welcome. I'm Sima Katauka and you're watching World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at the top headlines of this hour. Russian diplomat Dmitry Peskov speaks on the impending Witkoff-Putin meeting to be held in Moscow. The diplomat also speaks on India-Russia's defense ties and a potential $100 billion trade with India by 2030. As Russia-Ukraine peace talks gains momentum, U.S. President Donald Trump's special envoy Steve Witkoff and son-in-law Jared Kushner are to meet with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Moscow this week. Russian forces have claimed that they have captured the eastern Ukrainian city of Pokrovsk, which is a key logistics hub. However, Kyiv has not confirmed the Russian claims yet. White House defends U.S. attack on a boat from Venezuela as lawful, as White House defends U.S. admiral's decision to conduct multiple strikes on an alleged Venezuelan drug smuggling vessel starting from September, saying that he had Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth's authorization. A diplomatic clash between China and Japan over recent remarks by Prime Minister Sanai Takaichi is heating up at the United Nations. Chinese Ambassador Fu Kong has sent a second letter to Secretary General Antonio Guterres while urging Tokyo to retract the earlier remarks. Chinese and Japanese Coast Guard ships have collided in fresh confrontation near disputed Diaoyu Senkaku Islands, which are claimed by both as their territory. While China's spokesperson for the Coast Guard has said that the Chinese vessels took necessary control measures and issued warnings to the Japanese boat. White House says that Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth approved the second strikes on an alleged Venezuelan drug boat, but also clarifies that he did not issue order to kill everyone on board. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer has warned that China poses national security threats to the United Kingdom. This comes ahead of a crucial decision on the Chinese super embassy in the UK next week. Now for this hour, we start with Indonesia. Indonesia is facing worsening humanitarian disaster on Sumatra Island. The death toll from floods and landslides have now climbed to 604 people and 464 people are still missing, according to the National Disaster Agency. Search and rescue teams are racing across 3 provinces, while about 570,000 residents have been displaced. Roads are buried or washed out and communications are down, forcing aid to be flown in. North Sumatra is the hardest hit, with homes crushed by mud and entire villages cut off. A vital route through Aden coating in North Tapanuli has been severed, blocking access to Sibolga, a port city badly damaged by days of relentless rain. Survivors say they have lost everything and urgently need food, water, and medicine. President Prabowo says relief efforts are at full force and stresses that Indonesia must strengthen climate resilience and local disaster preparedness. Indonesia is facing a worsening humanitarian disaster on Sumatra Island. The death toll from the floods and landslides have climbed to 604 people, and 464 people are still missing, according to the National Disaster Agency. Search and rescue teams are racing across 3 provinces where about 570,000 residents have been displaced. Roads are buried or washed out and communications are down, forcing aid to be flown in. Now for this discussion, we welcome Mr. Vibhuti Rai. He's an environmentalist, joins us live from Lucknow, India. Thank you very much for joining us. Welcome to NewsX World. Now, given the scale of flooding and landslides in Sumatra, in Southeast Asia now, what underlying environmental and land use factors, how do you think these have led to or may have intensified the impact of this disaster?
Well, there are several reasons that I see. The Sumatra has many hilly terrains. At the same time, their infrastructure is not as good as it should be. And there's a lot of mudslides already. They were happening in the past, but the government should have made infrastructure so that once the rains of that magnitude were supposed to happen, and that can be done with the help of satellite data, it was possible to at least save many of these calamities, many people who died, because these rains have created weak zones in an already stretched environment or geologically unstable system there. So the rains have actually created the very large scale mudslide, and because most of the villages and habitation areas were very close to these hilly terrain, they have all been infested with not only floods but at the same time with the rain with the landslide. So I think there are more geological reasons for that, and for future, I think the government of Indonesia and maybe many other countries who are part of the network, they should put in inputs for making this area resilient to rainfall led landslides.
Right.
Yeah.
Mr. Rai, please stay with us as we have a breaking news to take. We'll come back to you. Now, breaking news, Indonesia is facing an escalating disaster on Sumatra Island. The National Disaster Agency now says the death toll from last week's floods and landslides has climbed to 712 people. More than 500 people are still missing, and the number of those affected has surged to around 1.1 million people across 3 provinces. Heavy rain has washed out roads and widespread power outages are hampering rescue efforts as emergency teams continue searching for survivors. Authorities warn that the toll could rise further as access to remote areas slowly reopens. Now for this discussion, we welcome back Sir Vibhuti Rai. He's an environmentalist, joins us live from Lucknow, India. Thank you very much, Sir Rai, for staying with us.
Yeah.
Now, what do you think is government's responsibility? What specific policy or community level measures should government prioritize to reduce the risk of such catastrophic events?
I think it's both government and people's participation, and maybe corporate world should come in, and at least those areas which are prone to such disasters in the past and maybe this time, the area should have been properly mapped, and on the basis of this mapping, how in case of certain level of rainfall or storm, that can make the area very susceptible to
Here we may have lost connection with Mr. Vibhuti Rai. He joined us as an environmentalist from Lucknow. With that, I would like to thank Mr. Rai. Now we move the focus to Europe. Residents and former soldiers in Ukraine's Kyiv are expressing doubt over Russian claims of capturing Pokrovsk. They point out that there has been no confirmation from Ukrainian authorities and warn the reports could be a propaganda ahead of the peace talks. Many citizens emphasize the importance of defending every part of Ukrainian territory, while also acknowledging that negotiations may require direct engagement with opposing forces. Despite the uncertainty, there is hope that Ukraine is maintaining control and that diplomats are handling the talks professionally. Let's in fact listen into what some of the soldiers have shared.
Чесно кажучи, не вірю, тому що немає підтвердженої інформації з боку Генерального штабу. Навпаки, йде суперечлива інформація і спростовують. Я думаю, що це розганяється перед переговорами, які мають бути, і тому інформація, скоріш за все, не відповідає.
Для нас важливий кожен метр нашої землі, а прив'язуватись до територіальної, Покровськ, не Покровськ, Бахмут, також важливе місце. Нам треба боротися за кожен метр. А як повпливати, це вже залежить від професіоналізму наших дипломатів. Як би це було, може комусь не сподобається, але щоб домовитись про мир, нам треба домовлятися з тим, з ким ми воюємо. Тому бігати до американців, потім їхати, грати в поломаний телефон, це моя особиста думка. Да, дипломатія працює трохи по-іншому, але нам треба або сідати за стіл переговорів, якщо хочуть домовлятися, або продовжувати воювати.
Now for this discussion, we welcome Ben Aris. He's a journalist, joins us live from Berlin. Thank you very much, Ben, for joining us again. Good to see you. Ben, please share your analysis on the current ongoing situation between Ukraine and Russia on Pokrovsk.
Well, the battle for Pokrovsk has been going on for more than a year. A bit more than a year ago that the Russians took the city of Avdiivka, and then they've been advancing further into Donbass. And as you mentioned, Pokrovsk is a key hub, a logistics hub that supplies the whole of the eastern front for the Ukrainian armed forces with everything they need. So its fall is a serious problem to continuing the fight against the Russians. But that advance from Avdiivka to Pokrovsk, it's only 41 kilometers between the two, and it's taken a whole year for the Russian forces to get there, which highlights just how bitter, how awful this battle is. And it's been in slow collapse for about 2 weeks. The Russians infiltrated special forces into the city at the beginning of November, and it's come down to a Stalingrad-like battle between the two sides. There's no fixed front. They're jumping from building to building. But according to the latest reports, the Russians are claiming that they've taken complete control of the city. However, it's clear that there's ongoing street battles. But I think that the majority of the city has been occupied by Russia. And this piece of news is key that it comes exactly today, because in a few hours' time, the US Special Envoy Steve Witkoff is going to meet with Putin to discuss a ceasefire plan to end the war in Ukraine. And Russia taking this city gives Putin extra leverage in that discussion, because his line all the way along has been either you accept my terms without compromise, or we will just take what we want by force. And here they are, having taken a key city on the day those negotiations begin.
And what do you think, or what could happen, as we know that the ceasefire talks are ongoing, and U.S. delegation is headed to, including Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner is headed to Russia now. Do you think anything realistic, feasible can come out of this?
Well, it's all speculation at this point, but the US floated this plan, which they drew up in cooperation with the Kremlin. However, the Ukrainians did have some input. They were shown the draft and added some things to it. Nevertheless, the plan was then taken to the Europeans, who introduced a lot of alternative ideas that the Kremlin will reject out of hand. And I think now what we're seeing is a split between the US and Europe, that they simply can't agree on a draft. And so what I'm expecting to happen today is for Witkoff to do the original version of the plan they drew up with the Russians, and agree that with Putin, and then take it back and present it to Ukraine as a fait accompli and try and force Ukraine to accept it. And I'm pretty certain that Zelensky will reject it out of hand, and he will be backed by the Europeans. And then we're into a really messy diplomatic situation where you've got the US leaning on Ukraine, who's being backed by Europe, and a split between Europe and the US, while Trump tries to get this sort of Russianized version of the plan through.
Right. Please, Mr. Aris, please stay with us as we come back to you. Now, we stay on this topic. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has said on Tuesday that Ukraine is taking its diplomatic work absolutely seriously as talks with US officials continue. He has warned that Russia has launched new disinformation campaigns aimed at undermining the meetings between Ukrainian and US negotiators. President Zelensky has confirmed that the Geneva document, a framework for potential peace discussions, has been further developed. He has added that Ukraine is actively working to bring more European partners into the process, aiming to build broader support for any eventual settlement. The president also said that he had received a full report from the Ukrainian negotiating team currently holding talks in the United States, calling the discussions constructive and essential for Ukraine's long-term security. Meanwhile, a plane used by U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff has arrived in Moscow. Putin will be receiving Witkoff and Kushner in the Kremlin. Translators will accompany Witkoff and Kushner to their meeting with Putin. According to media reports, Russian presidential envoy Kirill Dmitriev will meet U.S. Special Representative Steve Witkoff in Moscow today. Witkoff, along with Jared Kushner, the son-in-law of U.S. President Donald Trump, is also expected to meet Russian President Vladimir Putin. Now for this discussion, we welcome back Mr. Ben Aris. He's a journalist, joins us live from Berlin. Thank you very much for staying with us. Now, continuing our discussion, with Zelensky warning about new Russian disinformation campaigns targeting the U.S.-Ukraine talks in particular, what reports are you hearing or anything you can share with us in regards of that these narratives are being pushed towards frontline troops or civilian populations?
Well, it pertains to what I was talking about before. I mean, the different versions of the plan. So you mentioned Geneva, the summit in Geneva where the European leaders met. They took the original US 28-point plan, and then they hacked it around and ended up with a 19-point plan, which is extremely different to the US version and represents European and particularly Ukrainian interests. And now we've come into a sort of rhetorical battle between the sides in order to try and pressure both America and Europe into agreeing on a single version that is both acceptable to Ukraine and at the same time might fly with the Americans. But then for Zelensky, this is a huge political problem because if he doesn't get representation, things like he doesn't want to give up territory, things like he wants to keep the door to NATO membership open. And if he just capitulates to a US-led plan, which is full of Russian demands, then at home, he's already extremely unpopular because he's caught up in the biggest corruption scandal of his career. And he faces the possibility, there's chatter in Kiev that he might be ousted, that he might resign by the end of the year. And so for him, it's existential on a personal level as well as existential on a Ukrainian level. And so everybody's throwing out these barbs. And again, I think part of the message that you just mentioned is aimed at the Ukrainian population in order to, to exonerate Zelensky and saying, look, this isn't my problem, this is Russian disinformation, all these other ideas that are being proposed. But also at the Americans too, and the Russians, they're trying to stick to their guns and get Putin to make some real concessions, particularly on the region, on the question of territories, because Putin, and the whole talk today will turn on that, in so much as Putin is insisting that Ukraine give up all of the Donbass, and the Ukrainians are flatly refusing to do that.
Right. With that, I would like to thank Mr. Ben Aris for joining us today as a journalist from Berlin and sharing that insight throughout our news. Thank you very much. Now we move the focus to Middle East. Qatar, a key mediator in the Gaza negotiations, said on Tuesday that it hopes Israel and Hamas can soon move into a new phase of peace talks. This follows their ceasefire agreement reached in October. Qatari Foreign Ministry spokesperson Majid Al-Ansari has said that Doha believes both sides must be pushed very soon towards the next stage of negotiations. He has noted that upcoming discussions would involve sensitive issues, including Hamas fighters still positioned inside the tunnels located in Israeli-controlled areas of Gaza. Qatar continues to play a central role in trying to shape a long-term deal that could reduce tensions and move the conflict closer to a political resolution. Now for this discussion, we welcome Sasha Machta. He's a political commentator, joins us live from Tel Aviv. Thank you very much, Mr. Sasha, for joining us again. Good to see you. Now, looking at this, how might Qatar's push for a new phase, what's your analysis on current readiness? Do you think both sides, Hamas and Israel, are ready to leverage the negotiation further towards more sensitive issues?
After a few weeks, several weeks of the first phase of the ceasefire, the successful return of the living hostages, and of 26 deceased hostages, the preparation for phase 2 of the deal appears to be reaching its boiling point. We are at a stage where Hamas still has to return 2 deceased bodies. One of them is actually supposed to be returned today pending forensic review to make sure that it's truly the body corresponding to one of the remaining hostages. And this means that phase 2 would be able to begin. The pressure on behalf of Qatar that is exerted on Hamas is crucial. This pressure that came from Qatar and also Turkey was actually what led to the deal happening in the first place. Hamas are ideologically and financially backed by Qatar, who are their patrons, and the new updates that we've been hearing in the past few hours that Qatar is insisting on pushing Hamas and Israel to phase 2, this is significant and should be an optimistic sign. Regarding phase 2, this is actually the demilitarization and disarmament of Hamas. I don't believe that Hamas will agree to this without any challenge or pressure, which is why this Qatari demand and pressure is so critical to the success of phase 2. We know that the disarmament is what is standing between a temporary ceasefire as it is now and actual peace. We know that a future with Hamas in Gaza is not a possibility. Israel has made that clear, and the whole region understands that Hamas must be removed from power, both their arms and their ruling over Gazan civilians. So we believe that with ISF coming in soon, which has been approved already by the UN, and other plans that are being floated by the US Trump administration, might be a way to force and actually put some military pressure, not just diplomatic pressure, on Hamas to leave, because they're not going to willingly disarm, which is what is required for phase 2. And we're going to have to wait and see for the returning bodies of hostages and the pressure being put on. And let's hope for good news and for the continuation of this deal.
And building on that, what do you think, what political challenges could arise further as mediators attempt to transition to the next phase in terms of longer-term agreement? Do you think anything that could be solving this crisis among them for long-term, do you think anything has been reached which could solve this crisis?
One of the main challenges, as you mentioned, is actually the ISF itself, getting countries to voluntarily send their soldiers to Gaza. Of course, as long as Hamas does not disarm willingly, which is what they should be doing as stipulated by the agreement, many countries are going to have a challenge in sending their soldiers to actually fight and disarm Hamas themselves. That's not what they want to do, and Israel understands that. The only party that ever had an interest in militarily disarming Hamas was Israel. And of course, this is not an option anymore. Israel does not want to go back to war. So we're going to see challenges coming up regarding the ISF actually beginning their operation in Gaza, whether this will come before the disarmament and they will have to face Hamas, or whether this will be a peacekeeping force, as the King of Jordan mentioned, not actually one that enforces the deal militarily, but one that is there just to keep quiet. So that's one of the other challenges, and I believe that the solution of dividing Gaza in two, one under control by Hamas temporarily and one under the Israeli Yellow Line side, is an option that seems more and more realistic, especially because winter is coming and the people of Gaza that are living under Hamas control can't tolerate another brutal winter under control by terrorists. So the US might begin building housing in the Israeli side and allow for innocent Gazans.
Hello and welcome. I'm Kriti Mehta and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at the top headlines this hour. US-Russia find no compromise on key territory issue after Ukraine talks. Kremlin says Ukraine talks with US useful, but a lot of work ahead. Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky urged continued pressure on Russia, calling the territorial issue the most difficult. He adds that he hopes to meet US President soon. Russian President Vladimir Putin says Russia does not seek war with European powers, but is ready to fight if Europe pursues a direct conflict. He also accuses Europe of blocking US President Donald Trump's Ukraine peace efforts. French President Emmanuel Macron gears up to visit Beijing today. He is expected to put pressure on his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping to help secure a ceasefire in Ukraine and discuss trade relations. US President Donald Trump signs into law a measure forcing the US State Department to review guidelines for the country's engagement with Taiwan amid escalating concerns that China could move against the self-governing island. And Trump says he held a very productive call with Brazil's President Lula discussing trade, sanctions and joint efforts against organized crime as both leaders seek to deepen economic cooperation and strategic ties. The Trump administration has altered the immigration applications from nationals of 19 countries already facing U.S. travel restrictions, with the USCIS saying processing delays are necessary to protect national security. UN Ambassador Danny Danon will join U.S. counterpart Mike Waltz on a visit to Israel from December 8 to 10. The trip continues a Trump administration's engagement following the October Gaza ceasefire. And viewers, let's start the bulletin with some crucial developments coming in regards to the Russia-Ukraine war. Now, Russian President Vladimir Putin has said that Russia does not want a war with European powers, but is ready to fight if Europe did not want a direct conflict with Moscow. Putin has also accused European powers of hindering US President Donald Trump's attempts to end the war in Ukraine by putting forward proposals they know are unacceptable to Moscow. Let's listen in first to what Putin said.
Только вопрос в чем? Если Европа вдруг начнет с нами войну, мне кажется, что очень быстро, это же не Украина. С Украиной мы там действуем хирургическим способом, аккуратненько. Так, чтобы, понятно, да? Это не война в прямом современном смысле этого слова. Если Европа вдруг захочет начать с нами войну и начнет ее, то очень можно очень может быстро произойти ситуация, при которой нам не с кем будет договариваться.
Meanwhile, Putin has claimed that the eastern Ukrainian railway hub of Kupiansk has been under Moscow's control for weeks. He's added that Russia would shortly also capture Kupiansk Vizlovy, a Ukrainian settlement in the south of Kupiansk. Now, Putin has also threatened to sever Ukraine's access to the sea in response to drone attacks on tankers of Russia's shadow fleet in the Black Sea. Listen in.
Там еще один населенный пункт, который называется Купянск-Узловая. Вот там, по-моему, 2000 зданий. Там идут боевые действия. 600 зданий, где-то около 1000 уже, 600-650 в руках российской армии. Идет продвижение. Я думаю, что через несколько дней мы заберем и этот тоже населенный пункт. Но это отдельный населенный.
And now request Irina Sukuman, senior journalist, joining us live from New York. Thank you, Irina, for joining us here at NewsX World. Now, one of the key sticking points, of course, is the use of Russian frozen assets as far as European Union is concerned. What do you think are some of the others on which Putin has now, in fact, gone on to warn Europe of a war with it?
He seems to be using nothing but threats as his leverage. At this point, the issue of the frozen assets should not be a matter of controversy. This is not an early stage of the war where it's not clear which of the oligarchs were involved in financing and which weren't. It's very clearly that everyone who is backing the Putin regime is backing the war. It's one and the same. And there should be no question about the fact that Russian state assets and Russian private assets by assorted oligarchs and companies and supposedly private entities are all benefiting the war effort and all are in violation of international norms. Just like everything that Putin is doing, not only in Ukraine, but in provocative and aggressive actions inside other European countries is also in violation of international laws, in some cases quite aggressively so. The internet cable cutting under the waters, for instance, is yet another example of completely illegal behavior that is contributing to destabilization. And of course, illicit trade, money laundering, all sorts of illicit activities, all of these are more than sufficient to justify releasing these resources towards collective security.
Irina, now Putin has also threatened to sever Ukraine's access to sea in response to the drone attacks on tankers of Russia's shadow fleet in the Black Sea. How do you view that?
I think the opposite is much more likely, given the fact that the Russian Black Sea fleet is practically non-existent. Most of it has been successfully tanked and drowned by the Ukrainians, and the rest has had to retreat far, far away from that vicinity. So I think these threats are empty, and to the extent that that Russia is continuing making these threats, this is as good as time as any for Europe and other allies to assist Ukraine with severing Russia's bridges connecting Crimea and the rest of the Ukrainian territories, and make it impossible for Russia to carry out its threats and to pursue any sort of concerted activity in that area. In other words, the tables need to be turned. Russia should be in no position to make any threats to anybody.
All right. Well, thank you, Irina, for joining us and giving your comment there. With that, viewers, we are now going to move on. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has addressed the Irish Parliament, thanking the country for its steadfast support. Zelensky has called for pressure to stay on Russia during his speech at the Irish Parliament. Listen in.
Ireland has stood firmly and clearly for our independence and for a just end to this war. So thank you for your steadfast support for these years of standing with us. And thank you for not losing faith in us. All the pressure on Russia must remain in place so that Russia does not believe it will be rewarded for this war with stolen Ukrainian land or kidnapped Ukrainian children.
And Zelensky has also said that Ukrainian territory issue is the most difficult issue. He's added that it is Russia's goal that the US withdraws from any engagement with Ukraine. Meanwhile, he has also stated that he hopes to meet with US representatives as soon as possible after Russian President Putin's meeting with US envoy Steve Witkoff in Moscow. Meanwhile, Ukrainian Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha has said in a post on X that Putin has consistently made statements that demonstrate that he does not intend to end the war. He's added that it is time now to force Russia to end the war in Ukraine. All right, I would now request Irina Sukuman, senior journalist, to join us back in the discussion here. Irina, Zelensky's remarks, how do you view them, given that many have been saying that the peace plan is rather tilted towards Russia? But here Zelensky is saying that Russia wants the US out of the peace talks.
Look, the entire so-called peace plan is actually a surrender plan that was masterminded by Russia and sold as an influence operation. The fact that Witkoff keeps falling for these plans, and he has advised Russia on how to circumvent U.S. resistance to this, is just another example why he is not qualified to lead these talks at all. Unfortunately, Russia has actually very few cards left, and it keeps replaying them. The only thing in its favor is that the US administration, which appears to have very few to no Russian experts, keeps falling for the same tricks the entire time. Had it not been this case, this conversation would have been entirely different from the very beginning. The pressure would have been on Russia to make very significant concessions and then eventually to withdraw, not on Ukraine, which has been defending not only itself, but also serving as an effective buffer against continued Russian aggression well into Europe. We are seeing the replay of these outdated Russian propaganda ploys because Russia needs to divert attention from its own military and economic losses, and it's suffering very heavy losses, and its progress is, no matter what Putin may claim, is actually quite incremental. It's incredibly slow, especially given the disparity in size and alleged military might between Russia and Ukraine. That only underscores the extremely slow progress Russia is making, and the losses it has suffered in actually losing some of the territories it claimed early in the war. So actually time is on Ukraine's side, time is on the side of the allies, and US has every means at its disposal to force Russia into very serious concessions.
All right, well, I thank you for joining us, Irina, on NewsX World and giving us your perspective. And with that, viewers, we will now move on to some more developments on the peace deal that's under works. US President Donald Trump and Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva held a phone call on Tuesday discussing trade, the economy, and organized crime. Trump told reporters that the conversation also touched on sanctions, referencing measures his administration imposed over Brazil's prosecution of former President Jair Bolsonaro. Now, in a social media post, Trump said that he looks forward to further talks with Lula and expects the partnership to yield positive results. Brazil's presidential palace thanked Trump for removing additional tariffs on U.S. imports of Brazilian products, including coffee, beef, cacao, and fruits. During the 40-minute call, Lula emphasized the need to strengthen U.S.-Brazil cooperation to fight international organized crime. The talks come amid heightened U.S. activity in the region, including military deployments in the Caribbean and the ongoing strikes against suspected drug boats off of Venezuela's coast. Let's take a look.
Sir, you had a call with Brazil's President Lula today. Can you tell us what you discussed?
Yeah, we had a great talk. We talked about trade. We talked about sanctions, because, as you know, I sanctioned them, having to do with certain things that took place. But we had a very good talk. I like him. Very good. We had some good meetings, as you know, but we had a very good talk today. Yes, I did.
Viewers, Trump there in his statement says talks were rather productive between him and Lula da Silva, and in fact suggesting relations between the two countries are finally improving. Reducing trade barriers and tackling organized crime were among the topics they discussed, and both of them agreed they would speak again soon. In fact, a statement also came in from the Brazilian president, who said, "I stress the urgency of strengthening cooperation with the U.S. to combat international organized crime." President Trump stressed his full willingness to work with Brazil, and he will give full support to joint initiatives between the two countries to confront these criminal organizations. Trump, meanwhile, signaled that their conversation built upon a dialogue they had started in September on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly in New York City. In fact, Trump also went on his Truth Social platform to say that President Lula and I established a relationship at a meeting which took place at the UN, and I believe it set the stage for very good dialogue and agreement long into the future. And now I'd like to welcome Matthew Wadham, American journalist and author from Washington. Thank you, Matthew, for joining us this morning in India from NewsX World. Matthew, should we finally believe that relations between US and Brazil may be improving after months of economic and political tension?
Well, clearly they are improving, but what is driving the improvement is not entirely clear. I suspect it's because President Trump is tired of Americans complaining about inflation, and so that's why he's reduced or taken off the tariffs on Brazilian exports, a lot of which come into the country, such as coffee and beef. So I don't think that Brazil has done anything in terms of his friend and ally, former President Jair Bolsonaro, who's in prison on what appear to be trumped up charges. They haven't done anything to alleviate that situation. So I'm left to speculate, I'm left to conclude that this is purely motivated by domestic U.S. politics, presumably a desire to lower consumer prices on popular Brazilian imports to the U.S., such as coffee and beef. So that would be that. Without knowing for sure, that would be my guess.
All right, and there's also the larger question of tension over Bolsonaro. What can we expect from Brazil in this regard?
What can we expect from Brazil? Probably nothing, because they have a Supreme Court that is basically a very powerful branch of government that doesn't operate like a court at all. It operates like a prosecution service, and it gets away with things that Supreme Courts in other countries like the United States and Canada would never get away with. And I suspect Brazil is not going to do anything because President Lula da Silva views Jair Bolsonaro as a mortal enemy, and I think they want to keep him behind bars. I don't know if he's going to be, what's his sentence, 27 years or something outrageous like that. He may not serve that full term. not a young man. He may not even live that many years. But I think, at least for the time being, Lula's administration in Brazil views Bolsonaro as a threat, so they're not going to do anything to accommodate him or placate his followers.
And what about the Venezuela question? How should we see Brazil posturing its foreign policy when Trump is almost at the verge of what some would see as an invasion?
You're talking about the narco traffickers from
Yes.
South America
Yeah.
that are coming from Venezuela and Colombia, and to a lesser extent from Brazil. I'm not sure if Brazilian narcotics are a major factor in the illegal drug market in the United States, but they may have. I think mostly they go to Europe, but that doesn't mean that the U.S. approves of the activity. And on the call that Lula and Trump had, apparently they discussed Brazil, the fact that Brazil is going to crack down on organized crime more strongly than it has in the past. And I think that would please the United States government, because Donald Trump is not enthusiastic about narco trafficking. And look what he's especially if there's a possibility of the drugs reaching the United States. Look at him having the U.S. military blow up alleged Venezuelan narco trafficking vessels in the Caribbean Sea, and now dozens of alleged drug smugglers have been killed. And that just shows, whether you agree with the policy or not, it just shows that the Trump administration is quite committed to combating illegal drug trafficking. So anything that is going to move the ball forward in terms of cracking down on illegal drug trafficking is probably going to be favored by the Trump administration.
All right, do stay on with us, Matthew, as we move on to some more developments now coming in. The Trump administration, viewers, has halted immigration applications from nationals of 19 countries that already face U.S. travel restrictions, according to a policy memo from USCIS. Now, the agency said the pause may delay some green card and citizenship applications, but is necessary to ensure applicants are fully vetted for national security reasons. The measure primarily affects African and Asian countries previously identified as high risk, including those fully or partially restricted under Trump's 2024 travel bans. USCIS Director Joseph Edlow said he doubts Afghan nationals arriving after the U.S. Withdrawal were properly screened, emphasizing that no applications will proceed without maximum vetting. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem supported a strict approach, calling for comprehensive travel bans on countries she described as posing risks to U.S. safety. The pause highlights ongoing tension in U.S. immigration policy and the government's focus on stringent screening amid national security concerns. And I'd now request Matthew to join us back for his comment on this. Matthew, would you agree that Trump's reaction was a rather knee-jerk one, or one that was long due after the National Security Guard shooting?
I think it can be both at the same time. I think it was long overdue, if that's what you're saying, to have people from these developing nations screened properly. But clearly it's a reaction to the shooting a week ago of the two National Guardsmen in Washington, D.C. by an Afghan national who apparently received asylum from the Trump administration after not being properly vetted, though the Trump administration is blaming the prior government, the Biden administration, for not screening him properly. So they're saying that this whole system is a mess with respect to immigrants from Afghanistan, and other places such as Burma, which the regime there calls Myanmar, but we largely still call it Burma, and Libya and Somalia and Iran and other majority Muslim countries known for being hotbeds of terrorism, like Afghanistan. And so they're taking a pause right now, and it's not clear how long it's going to take while the United States reevaluates how it vets people, how it studies the background of people from those countries to make sure you don't have more people coming through who hate America and want to kill National Guardsmen. So I think that this is probably a good move that was overdue, but clearly the shooting of the two National Guardsmen, one of whom died, the lady died, unfortunately, 20-year-old woman, I think that clearly that is what prompted it, because that grabbed people's attention, and the public demanded that something be done. And when it comes to issues involving national security, President Donald Trump is very responsive to his constituents. He's not responsible in all issues, in all areas, but when it comes to national security, he acts very quickly and decisively. So I think they're going to take a while to review their policies. Maybe it'll just be a few months, I'm not sure. And then perhaps they will resume processing people from those 19 countries on the so-called travel ban again. But we're going to have to wait and see what happens, because a lot of people are still in shock over the shooting of the two National Guardsmen in Washington, D.C., and they don't want this kind of thing to recur again in the future.
And what's in it in all of this? What's the situation of those who are currently there in the United States, the Afghan immigrants after the Taliban takeover of Afghanistan?
I don't think the government has announced any plans to remove them just yet, but they are reviewing their cases to see what should be done. Many of the tens of thousands of these Afghan citizens came to the United States under a program started during the Biden administration to allow people who had been America's allies in the war in Afghanistan to come here, and yet it hasn't worked out in all cases, and apparently a lot of Afghans are having difficulty adjusting to the United States. So I think they're going to be going through, I don't know if they're going to be doing a case-by-case review, but they're going to be going through the files of these people and deciding what should be done about them. I don't think removals of Afghans given they call it parole status, immigration parole status. I don't think that they're in imminent danger of being deported from the United States, but it could happen in the future, and I think it's a bit too early to say what's going to happen to them. But I suspect the United States is not going to be taking a lot of immigrants from places like Afghanistan and Somalia and Iran in the immediate future. I just don't think it'll happen. The door may be closing on them.
All right, sure. Thank you for your perspective there, Matthew. I'd let you go with that. And we move on now to news from Australia, where the government has said that Australia's looming social media ban will protect children aged from under 16 from being drawn into an online purgatory. The Australian Communications Minister Anika Wells has said that with one law, Australia can protect Generation Alpha from being sucked into purgatory by the predatory algorithms described by the man who created the future as behavioral cocaine. Let's listen into Anika Wells.
Australia will become the first country in the world to ban under 16s from having social media accounts. With one law, we can protect Generation Alpha from being sucked into purgatory by predatory algorithms described by the man who created the feature as behavioural cocaine. However, if a child has a social media account on 10 December, then that platform is breaking the law. And if YouTube even this morning is reminding us all that it is not safe and that there is content not appropriate for age-restricted users on their website, then that is a problem that YouTube needs to fix.
And with that, we move on, viewers, to tell you that Italian fashion house Prada has officially acquired its longtime rival Versace in a $1.375 billion cash deal. The acquisition, which was finalized on December 2nd, coincided with the 79th birth anniversary of Versace founder Gianni Versace. The move comes after 8 months of negotiations and is seen as Prada's strategy to revive Versace, which struggled under US-based Capri Holdings following the pandemic. Now, Capri Holdings, which owns other luxury brands including Michael Kors and Jimmy Choo, confirmed it will use the proceeds from the sale to reduce its debt. Prada issued a statement confirming that all regulatory approvals are complete and the acquisition is now official. Meanwhile, Donatella Versace, the brand's creative director and Gianna's sister, welcomed the deal on Instagram, honoring her late brother's legacy. That's all the time we have for Keep Watching NewsX World for more news updates from around the world.
Hello and welcome. I'm Asuma Katauka and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at the top headlines of this hour. As Russia-Ukraine peace talks gains momentum, U.S. President Donald Trump's special envoy Steve Witkoff and son-in-law Jared Kushner are headed to meet Russian President Vladimir Putin in Moscow. Russian forces have claimed that they have captured the eastern Ukrainian city of Pokrovsk, which is a key logistics hub. However, Kyiv has not confirmed the Russian claims yet. White House defends U.S. attack on boat from Venezuela is lawful, as White House defends a U.S. admiral's decision to conduct multiple strikes on an alleged Venezuelan drug smuggling vessel starting from September, saying he had Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth's authorization. A diplomatic clash between China and Japan over recent remarks by Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi is heating up at the United Nations. Chinese Ambassador Fu Kong has sent a second letter to Secretary General Antonio Guterres while urging Tokyo to retract the earlier remarks. White House defends U.S. attack on boat from Venezuela as lawful, as White House defends a U.S. admiral's decision to conduct multiple strikes on an alleged Venezuelan drug smuggling vessel starting from September. He has said that Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth's authorization. Former Honduran President Juan Orlando Hernandez has been released from a U.S. prison where he was serving a 45-year sentence for drug trafficking and firearms offenses after receiving a presidential pardon from U.S. President Donald Trump. The European Central Bank has refused to backstop a $163 billion loan to Ukraine, with officials criticizing that the EU's plans to use frozen Russian assets would violate the bank's mandate. Taiwan's opposition blocks $40 billion defense budget, prompting protests from ruling DPP, KMT and TPP say William Lai's government is seeking a blank check and demand details of procurement plans before proposal can be reviewed. Now for this hour, we start with Ukraine. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is calling for a complete end to the war with Russia, not just a pause in fighting. Speaking alongside Irish Prime Minister Michael Martin, Zelensky has said that Ukraine needs a dignified peace and warned that no deals should be made behind Ukraine's back. He has said that he's ready to meet U.S. President Donald Trump, but stressed that everything now depends on the outcome of the talks underway in Moscow. Zelensky added that he expects direct communication from the U.S. team immediately after their meeting with Russian officials. He has also said that there will be no easy decisions to end the war, but believes the chances for peace are better now than ever. He has repeated his call for frozen Russian assets to be used for Ukraine's defense and reconstruction. Separately, a senior Kyiv official said that Ukrainian delegation may meet U.S. envoys Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner as early as tomorrow, possibly in Brussels, though no final agreement has been reached. Now for this discussion, we welcome Mr. John Rosomondo. He's the president of Viking Research Associates and geopolitical expert, joins us live from Washington. Thank you very much, John, for joining us again. Good to see you. John, now looking at this, how do you analyze the current situation? Do you think we are closer to peace between Russia and Ukraine?
Well, I think that I'll say what I've said previously on this channel, that I don't see peace any closer because the Russians are not going to give up on their desire for all of the territory in the Donbass that would require the Ukrainians to give up the territory that they've managed to hold on to despite over 10 years of war. The Russians, on the other hand, will not give up because they believe that if they were to show any sort of weakness, it would be a sign to their people that they've lost, and they don't want to give that sign.
Right. And John, how might this situation in Pokrovsk and, ongoing territorial disputes, how do you think this is influencing Ukraine's negotiating position in Moscow-led peace talks?
Well, I mean, the Russians have been able to gain slight territorial advances at the expense of Ukraine. I think that, Ukraine is in a difficult situation. And that, if it wants to have, peace for the moment, it's going to have to make some painful concessions.
Yes, and but if it does cede, supposedly it does cede territory, how do you think it will affect the future of Ukraine and Russia's relationship?
Well, I think the one thing is that the Russians have shown, through their malfeasance and the Budapest agreement back in '94, which guaranteed the territorial integrity of Ukraine